your knowledge, is there a difference between physical abuse and verbal abuse? Is one worse than the other?
Well, I don't know if there's a working definition, Chantel, or any research to substantiate it, but I would say a more or less guesstimate based on reason. I would say that both are actually bad, but I would say that mental abuse carry longer scars because physical abuse, the pain will eventually heal if you understand it. But when it comes down to verbal abuse, it can last a long time. I'm gonna break it down for you.
Fire for your mind. The kosher clinician.
All right, so we're going to talk about verbal abuse, and I know you can't stay long, but this will be a great start to the conversation. I know a lot of times people tend to downplay verbal abuse because there are no scars, there are no visible scars. But you're a clinician. For those of you guys who don't know, this is kosher clinician, a licensed therapist. In your knowledge, is there a difference between physical abuse and verbal abuse? Is one worse than the other?
Well, I don't know if there's a working definition, Chantel, or any research to substantiate it, but I would say a more or less guesstimate based on reason. I would say that both are actually bad, but I would say that mental abuse carry longer scars because physical abuse, the pain will eventually heal if you understand it. But when it comes down to verbal abuse, it can last a long time. I'm gonna break it down for you. Boys, many times, get their tutelage at the behest of their mothers. The mothers are the first teachers, ideally from the behest of the father. So basically, the mothers teach the children, but in an ideal world, it's based on the admonition of the fathers. Now watch this. When a boy is getting negative input from his mother, what it does, Chantel, it can distort his self-image. Now, when it comes down to how psychology works on the mind, it's like this. There's a such thing called introjection, right? Introjection means when the person plays or put into someone. So it goes with introjection, then it turns to internalization, Chantel, and then the last stage is called identification. And so a person's identity is through the words many times of their mothers. And so if your mother say you ain't shit, you'll never be anybody, you just like your dad, then what can happen, you can raise an army or a generation of boys when they tend to project the pain from their mother through a concept called displaced aggression. So the mother displaces her aggression towards her son, and therefore the boy tends to identify with the mother. So therefore, anything associated with being masculine men, he projects his anger and pain through that vicious cycle of displaced aggression as well. So I would say that the mental abuse is worse. They both are wrong, but the mental abuse is definitely worse because men are imprinted through the mind. Men are imprinted through words because mothers are nurturers. Boys get their identity through words. If you go back to the Hebrew code, the angel told Jacob, you're no longer Jacob, but now your new name is Israel. And so we get identity through our words. That's how we get identification. That's how we feel good about ourselves. And so when you got a very nasty, abusive mother, what it does, it can arrest a child's development. It can make the development become arrested. They'll second guess themselves. They will not be as productive. And they'll always defer to the feminine instead of more or less standing on masculine principles, unless, Chantel, that person is a strong man.
And now, what are some of the traits of a abusive mother? Because my concern that is a lot of the verbal abuse tactic that women use in the Black community, we're not aware that it's verbal abuse. Like, for example, telling a son that, he's good for nothing, or telling him that constantly criticizing him and never praising him. Is that
right.
A form of verbal abuse?
Yes, ma'am, it is. It's definitely verbal abuse because once again, it diminishes the image of a boy. Boys get their identity through many times their fathers, but sadly, Chantel, many boys are growing up in homes where they don't have fathers. They have an identity issue, and so therefore, if they cannot get their identity through their fathers, they'll get it through gangs or other negative outcomes. Remember, in the clinical world, it say the needs drive behaviors. Needs drive behaviors. You're not getting your needs met, then you're going to find those needs from what's called a more maladaptive normality instead of something that's positive and something that's sustainable.
Now, ML Music, shout out to you, say you can live with mental abuse for years without even knowing it.
Right.
Physical, right off the bat. Now,
yes,
one thing I want to ask, a lot of times, so for example, if a man probably isn't getting the verbal abuse directly, but
Right.
he clicks like a boy, right? He clicks onto talk shows and he comes onto social media and hear Black women just talking down about Black men in general. Can that affect his self-worth, even though they're not speaking to him directly?
Right. So it's called the unconscious pathology. Remember, you and I never were slaves, but when everything you see associated with Black people or Black men in the media, Black men or women in the media is something negative, then you start to identify with that in an unhealthy way, unless you have an identity that's already been fortified by your family, your culture, or also by faith. So we tend to identify based on what we see. Projection, a lot of time, is based on television. The TV is a projection. It projects an image and a message. And many times that message is not good because, once again, Chantel, the image of many Black people for years have been marred in subjugation. It's been marred in saying that we were not as good as, and it's been marred in saying, like you were saying many times with Black men, that they're lazy, they're bad. That's why a lot of times many women tend to over-identify their pain to the few Black men that more or less did them wrong. And men sometimes do it too, but they tend to overgeneralize and over-identify their pain based on what happened to them in their past. So they'll go and overgeneralize and say, oh, Black men ain't shit, instead of saying some Black men have caused me pain. So they over-identify based on their pain. And so it's called trauma approximation. They tend to, trauma by proxy, they tend to more or less talk about their pain based on approximation to their trauma, if that makes sense.
Yeah, it makes sense. In your professional opinion, your personal opinion,
Right.
Do you think that a lot of Black men in a lot of Black men in Western countries are dealing with verbal abuse? Are they victim of verbal abuse?
Oh, no, definitely victim of verbal abuse. Many times in the inner cities. Listen, boys, or many times men, Chantel, when they travel abroad, they go through a catharsis because they never got the nurturing from their mothers. That's why a lot of times men, when they travel abroad, they cry because they're dealing with something called affection deprivation. They didn't get the affection from their mothers, and they didn't get the love and the affirmation from their moms. So many times they look for, when they get that affirmation and nurturing from another woman, it can cause them to have a catharsis. And that's why it's called, that's why a lot of times boys cry or shed tears, because, that's the men that shed tears. It's the first time that they ever were validated as men, if that makes sense.
So then if that's the case, focusing it on the men the passport bros who never get the validation or the love from their mom, go overseas, get it overseas, and then the woman over here shaming those passport bros, is that an additional verbal abuse to their already existing trauma?
Yes, right. And so yes, it's manipulation at its highest. And so, because once again, the boy tends to over-identify with the mother, if they're not strong enough, they will become saboteurs of that said shaming language. But if their minds are fortified enough, Chantel, that they can overcome that, then they don't identify with that anymore. They have a very new identity. Because once again, men and human beings are tribal by nature. That's why it's so important for men to come together as one, because we're tribal creatures. And so men get their identity once again through gangs. But once again, because of fatherlessness, and unfortunately, it's a percentage of men that's causing chaos in the Black community. It's not all, but because of fatherlessness, Chantel, they don't identify with their fathers. They tend to identify with their mothers, which in essence many times will sabotage them for their greater purpose, because they think that her mission is more important than his mission as a man.
So, and then as Big said in the chat, said thanks to Oprah. So talk shows such as Oprah Winfrey and The Views and all those talk shows that's basically on venting about Black men specifically, those are a form of verbal abuse as well, constantly talking negatively about their experiences.
Yes, ma'am, definitely. See, a lot of times, Chantel, a lot of these women, when they were in college, there were guys like athletes or jocks, that blew their backs out, they lied to them, told them how pretty they were, and they left them. And so anytime they see anything that's a vestige of masculinity, they tend to associate it once again with toxic masculinity. So once again, they tend to over-identify with their pain through a concept called trauma by proxy. And so anything associated with being Black or a man or masculinity, it's a problem. But watch this, it's contraindicated, Chantel, because the men that they get with that are more docile, they don't want those men. So it's like you're damned if you do and you're damned if you don't. You can either get the more passive, agreeable male, or you can get a masculine man that will love you when you're right and check you when you're wrong. And so, you can't win for losing. But a lot of these women approximate their pain based on abandonment when they were children, based on the struggles they had from their fathers, and they tend to associate it with all black men, which is overgeneralization, which is an ego defense mechanism.
So then the solution to all of this is both genders need therapy. Both genders need to go and get over their trauma.
Yes. But the only problem, Chantel, based on the toxic therapists that we saw on TikTok, many of them are woke therapists. They're woke. And so everything that's associated with masculinity is through the lens of wokeness. It's not through the lens of reason. It's through the lens of wokeness. So anything associated with heteronormative masculinity, Chantel, is through the lens of wokeness. And so therefore they tend to over-identify once again on what men are dealing with. Because remember, men are bad, men are the boogeyman, men are toxic, men are the reason why the world is bad, men are bubbling idiots, they're fools. And that's why so many men are checking out. So I'm not saying that they're not traditional therapists that are moderate or have a level of reason or even conservative therapists, but they're far and few in between, especially those that are masculine at their core.
Okay. Are you giving any therapy? Are you available for therapy for any men in the chat who want to reach out or who watching the replay want to reach out to you?
Well, Chantel, as you know, I'm in the greatest state in the union, the Tar Heel state. I'm always represent. But so I can't treat clients if they're not in my purview in my state, but I can do non-diagnostic consultations. A non-diagnostic consultation is not a bona fide diagnosis because a clinical treatment is based on intervals, intervention, diagnosing, and then also evaluation for discharge. But what I do, I can give clients an approximation of whatever they're dealing with and help them work through some of the thinking errors that they might be having.
Okay. And how can they reach out to you?
They can reach out to me, Chantel, at kosherclinician@gmail.com. That's kosherclinician@gmail.com.
All right. And if Ahmad can please drop that in the chat and drop the Kosher Clinicians YouTube channel. Thank you so much for agreeing to.
Do you have any more questions, Chantel? Any more questions?
None that I can.
I got a few more minutes. I'll give you 5 since you're a Leo, man. I'll give you 5.
Shout out to the Leos. None that I can think of off the top of my head. But one thing I want to emphasize, and one thing I'm using this live stream to emphasize, it's us as Black women, what we say on media and what we say in the talk shows and in our personal life when we complain about men, never have anything positive to say, but we focus on their cons. That's a form of verbal abuse. And we're Kosher Clinician. This is a question for you. What about the son, right? We say we have a single mom constantly complaining about men, constantly complaining that men are trash. Her son is overhearing that. Is he taking on that verbal abuse that she's giving to the man? Will he eventually, knowing that he's going to eventually become a Black man, is he being affected by that?
So it can do two things, Chantel, as I said earlier. It can make him become very aversive, meaning he can be very aversive towards masculine men that look like him, or he can become very docile. Do you see? It's almost like binary thinking. He can be either docile as it relates to him taking on a more passe role, or he could be very aversive to men that look like him. So if a boy is constantly hearing those negative interludes over and over again, Chantel, it definitely can have a negative effect on how he see himself, other Black men, and also his productivity as a man as well.
I love to give women the benefit of the doubt, although I know a lot of the hyenas don't deserve the benefit of the doubt. Right. But I honestly believe that when we say men are trash or when we talk down about men, it's out of habit, because that's what we've been programmed. That's true.
Yes, ma'am. It is out of habit, right?
Yeah. So then if we continue to have this narrative, we are constantly criticizing men. We can never say anything positive about them. What are your thoughts on that, though? The fact that Black women constantly focus on their negatives, focus on their cons, and disregard the positives.
Well, it's called the Mr. effect. It's the Mr. effect. It's negative socialization. Anything associated with pain, abuse, and hurt is always through the lens of the Black man. So it's a way to absolve themselves, Chantel, of any accountability or responsibility. Many will look within themselves and say, perhaps I played a role in my own demise. But see, it's easier, Chantel, to place it or displace the aggression towards the black man because, see, once again, many women have what's called the Medusa complex. See, the Medusa complex basically means this. When Medusa held up or more or less show her face to many, it will cause them to become, she will cause human beings to petrify. So with a lot of women, they can't put the mirror to themselves because it will give them what's called a cognitive break. They will actually become petrified because they cannot handle what they're seeing. So the man becomes the scapegoat, which is another ego defense mechanism, to justify the bad behavior instead of doing the self-awareness and the self-internalization to eradicate the bad behaviors that many times they got themselves in, sometime either directly, Chantel, or indirectly.
Understood. No, and in hearing everything, that's something. Thank you so much, Eric, for reminding me. Eric said they need to stop watching The Color Purple. How the movies like The Color Purple and the Tyler Perry movies and listening to advice that's only complaining about men, never can give an advice about when you do find a good man. How does that affect a female psyche?
Say it again, Chantel. I'm sorry. It's a lot of noise. I apologize. Say it one more time, please.
So constantly watching movies such as The Color Purple, constantly watching drama, reality TV shows, constantly surrounding themselves and hearing dating advice from people who warn you about men who cheat or who are abusive. How does that affect us as women entering relationships?
Well, it's a concept called confirmation bias. What it does, it confirms their bias, which in essence is another thinking error called the magnification of black men and their pathologies and the minimization of their own pathologies. It's confirmation bias at its finest. I'm going to minimize my bad behavior, but I'm going to magnify his behavior because there is no accountability, Chantel, when I look at myself. We as human beings all have to self-introspect, look at ourselves and ask ourselves the question, what role am I playing in my own pain? But that takes a level of maturity that some don't have because, see, we got a culture, Chantel, of simps and simp servers on the internet that go across the internet causing chaos. And so what they do, they tend to assuage them in their pathology. But see, a masculine man, Chantel, is not going to lie to you. He's going to tell you the truth. He's not telling you the truth because he's trying to hurt your feelings. He's actually telling you the truth because he cares about you. And sometimes, Chantel, the truth hurts. Like I remember a young lady told me, she said, tell me lies, tell me sweet little lies. Because they don't want to hear the truth. But you'll never grow unless you hear the truth. Because as I said before in the past, Chantel, Teddy Pendergrass said it better than me. He said, you can't hide from yourself. Everywhere you go, there you are. So you can't hide from yourself, Chantel.
No, my last question for you, in case you have to run. As a clinician and game changer, right. If you can come up if you want to. As a clinician, what are your thoughts on the normalcy of verbal abuse towards black men in the black community?
Well, once again, Chantel, it's liberal indoctrination. It's trauma by proxy. It's vicarious trauma based on what their mothers went through. And so it's normal. Listen, it's not only just a black man issue, Chantel, it's a man issue. You know, white women are just as bad in some ways. I think black women are worse, but it's just normal. It's normal to see men as bad. It's almost like that's part of the sin nature. You know, when Eve got caught in her bad behavior, she pointed to Adam. She didn't take accountability for it. So it takes a very aware woman, a woman that's very mature, to look at herself. That's why I'm so impressed with you. You've taken the work. You're extremely logical. I don't know how, but you're very logical, and you are very logical. And that has to be self-reflection. Most folks don't self-reflect, Chantel. It's easier to blame somebody else instead of taking the hit and saying, "Not my sister, not my brother, but it's me, oh Lord. I'm standing in need of prayer." And that's hard to do. But guess what? Those people will never grow because you know what? I can see bad pathologies coming a mile away. I can listen to what they're saying. And they're so consistent now, Chantel. The liberal indoctrination calls people to be what's called real thinkers. They think all in the same pattern. And it's very predictable. The behavior is very predictable. That's why I can identify it. But like I said, a lot of these women, if they don't wake up, and I think it's too late for many of them, they're going to be by themselves, sadly. But, you choose the behavior that you choose. And then you're going to suffer the recompense of your error, sadly.
Yeah, what I'm noticing is that a lot of them truly don't know that there's something wrong with how their behavior.
Right. Yes, ma'am. You're right. You're exactly right. You're exactly right. They don't know. It's called unconscious pathology. But here's the problem. Yeah. When men try to bring it to them, Chantel, they become deaf. That's cognitive dissonance because there's a cacophony going on inside their heads. The acronym I created with DEAF is this. They deny the evidence, Chantel, when you present it to them. They argue do ad hominem attacks, meaning they attack the messenger instead of the message. They become enraged when you present them with the information, and then they will fight you, do verbal abuse or physical, Chantel, or they'll flee because they can't handle the truth. They can't handle it because it will cause them to have a cognitive break. They can't handle it.
That's the only time they do cardio, when they're faced with the truth. This is them, kosher clinician. Wait, before you this is them. I already found the truth.
You're a fool, man. You are so funny, man. You are so funny.
I cannot thank you enough for coming on and spreading some knowledge to our long titties sisters.
Yeah, long titties, man. That therapist, she has some long titties too, man.
I know that therapist, huh? Let me see if I can find it before you leave. Someone had, I can't find it. It's not here. But someone had done a cartoon. Cut and Edge had done a cartoon about the therapist. I wanted you to see it. Let me see if I can pull it up. Oh, here it is. Let me see. It was hilarious. He put her long titties in the cartoon, kosher clinician.
Yeah, I saw that. That was funny. The old woman was spanking her. Yeah, who needs therapy?
And her long titties. Shout out to Cut and Edge. Kosher clinician, thank you so much for coming up and
no doubt, sis. Anything for the liners, man. You know you always get first seat, man. First class.
Thank you so much. Enjoy the rest of your day.
All right, sweetie. Be good. Bye-bye.
Have a good one. Y'all, powerful information from the kosher clinician. If you guys have not already, go over and subscribe to his channel. Thank y'all so much for being in here. I will see you guys in the next video. Take care.